The New South Wales Government has accepted all of the recommendations into a bushfire inquiry after last summer's terrible bushfires. And most importantly, hazard reduction is front and centre about something that can happen going into the next summer. The Emergency Services Minister is David Elliot, and we spoke a bit earlier today.
Well, in relation to hazard reduction, the intent of the Cabinet, the intent of, I think, that the recommendations from Mary O'Kane and Dave Owens was that we had to reduce any green tape that was potentially giving landowners a difficult time. And so the regulations and indeed the legislation that may be amended to ensure that occurs in a practical sense will be brought before the House. The Premier's given me a 6-week time frame to do that. But it will ensure that we people that who have their houses at risk can have limited, if not nil, obstructions to them from having fuel loads reduced. But it also will put an obligation on neighbours who are not preparing their land for a bushfire season to do exactly that. Now, some of those laws already exist. We're all about making sure that we remove as many obstacles as possible, and I think that's the intent of the recommendation. It's certainly my intent, and it's in the instructions from the Premier to me.
A pretty good document, and certainly the 76 recommendations, they all seem to make sense. But I do have a little query, though. Recommendation number 11 and recommendation 20 still talk a lot about how we work with local councils, and obviously local council roles are important here because there are some local councils that, frankly, are full of lunatics who have no interest in doing what seems common sense. Do we still face a situation where if a mayor on the South Coast is a greenie, they're going to be able to stop what other mayors in other parts of the state would be able to do? Or at some point do you get to override a local politician who is playing to the interest groups in their area?
Well, I think the latter will eventually be the situation, but I actually think that the receipt of this report, these recommendations, has had broad bipartisan support, even from the Greens. If they do get in my way, I'll be quite happy to introduce legislation, and the Premier has given me the opportunity to go above and beyond these 76 recommendations. So if these Green mayors want to get in the way, we'll just be warned that we'll stop at nothing, because I believe that there is a democratic obligation on this government to ensure that what we saw last summer doesn't happen again. But the answer is yes, we will be giving some of those recommendations that you referred to do refer to councils and our ability to make sure that they've got not only the rights but also the obligations to fulfil their obligations as people that are going to be good landlords, good landowners, good neighbours, and that applies to everybody. I want to make sure that not only the recommendations that we've seen that require legislative changes get those legislative changes. I want to make sure the intent of all of those recommendations is fulfilled. I think that's the only thing that we can do if we're going to be serious about preparing ourselves for what may or may not be the new normal. But I want to make sure also that if we do have to face this sort of bushfire season again, we have the same sort of preparedness and readiness available to us.
Well, no, there's no one recommendation, there's no one silver bullet. It's all of these things working together, as well as everything we've learnt over so many years. They're going to help us in the future summers. But away from the hazard reduction, what's the stuff that is in this report that most impresses you about our ability to do a better job than we have in the past?
Well, I think the report, in my mind, it justifies the investment that the New South Wales Government has made in technology and capital and assets and kit. We've obviously seen a real increase in reliance on aviation assets when it comes to firefighting capabilities over the course of the last couple of seasons. That report suggests that aviation assets are the future, and as I've said today, it's a typical military approach to fighting a battle. You put the airborne assets in, they will bomb, in this case water, the vital area, and then we can bring in the land forces to come and do the clearing up. The added bonus of having these capability, the aviation assets, is that while they're doing the water bombing, they can collect intelligence for the commanders, and they can also, in some cases, indeed with the Mari Bashir, the great new RFS jet that we've acquired last year, they can deploy firefighters as well. So I think what we're seeing is the RFS in New South Wales, remember, Paul, is the largest firefighting force in the world. This report suggests to me that it is actually world's best practice, particularly when it comes to a volunteer firefighting force. But that doesn't mean that because it is a volunteer firefighting force that we shouldn't be embracing the technology and capabilities, which we're doing.
He's a good guy. I'm glad he's around that cabinet table, and some common sense there when it comes to hazard reduction. David Elliot is the Emergency Services Minister in New South Wales.